How's it going, everyone? I'm Dylan. This is All You Can Board, and this game right here is Pathways. Now, Pathways is a dexterity game from Frank Sorrow that's going to see you sliding discs across this rectangular board, trying to get them to land in the empty spaces on the opposite end of the board. And at the end of the round, whoever has the most of their discs in the opposite end of the board compared to their opponent is going to win the round, and you're going to score 2 points for that, and you'll agree beforehand how many points you're going to want to play up to. I think the rulebook recommends 11, but there's a lot of flexibility in how you approach that. So the cool thing about this game is there's also multiple ways to play, and even from having read the rulebook and tried some of these multiple ways, it's very easy to even decide, hey, we're going to come up with our own house rules and our own other versions of how we're going to play this game. It's pretty flexible in how you're going to do that, and of course the interesting thing coming from the name Pathways is that you're essentially creating pathways for yourself to make it easier to get your discs across the board. So there's some cool strategy here, but it's a really accessible game that is going to especially appeal to younger audiences, families who are wanting to play something a little bit more interactive with their kids and aren't necessarily going to be gravitating towards experiences like, Terraforming Mars, these heavy strategic games. Want something that's easier and plays quick, Pathways is probably going to be a great option for you. So I'm going to jump in and teach you everything you need to know about this game, how it plays, what you might want to consider to find out if you want to back it for yourself. And of course, I do want to give a big thank you to Frank Sorrow for sending us this copy of Pathways to do this content for you so we can bring you this and give you some information to help you make your decision. So let's start by talking about how you play Pathways, and honestly, it is pretty simple. This is not going to take very long. Each player is going to have 12 discs in their own color, and you're going to alternate turns, essentially putting a disc onto the board and flicking it to the opposite end of the board. Now, it's obviously not always going to make it there. Sometimes you're going to fill in some of the holes along the way because the board is just completely filled with holes the entire way. But the idea is that you're slowly creating paths for yourself that now the discs, rather than just falling into the hole, are going to be able to slide across the surfaces of other discs to make it easier to land into the opposite end of the board. The back row is what you're targeting at the end of the round after everyone has slid all 12 of their discs. The person who has the most of their own discs at the back row is going to win the round. You're going to get 2 points for that, and you're going to have set ahead of time how many points you're playing up to, and you're going to keep track of that on this handy little score pad here. So that's really all there is to the game. It's very simple. There's multiple ways to play. There are variants that are listed in the rulebook. I'm not going to go over every single one, but just as an example, you can use the opposite side of the board, which is going to indicate that the back row is going to score you 2 points, whereas the second row from the back is going to score you a single point. This makes it easier for people that are potentially younger audiences to be able to score points more easily and not feel as discouraged that they're not being able to get to the back row. It's surprisingly challenging. I should mention, it may seem this is like the concept is very simple. Most of the early games I played of Pathways, I was scoring, sometimes one, or I shouldn't be saying scoring, but I was getting only one disc in the back row. There are some games where my opponent got none. You really have to stop, approach it from the perspective of, right from the early stages, you're not trying to get to the back row. You're trying to create the pathways for yourself and make it easier to get there. Only then are you really prioritizing getting those last few discs all the way across the board into that back row. You might get lucky early on, but if you don't create those pathways for yourself, it's going to be a lot harder. So that's where the strategy sort of comes into it. So there's other variants too that come in the box. There's one where it's a matter of trying to get 3 in a row in the back row. And like I said, there's also tons of room to just sort of come up with your own rules. And I know when I was growing up as a kid, often you would not even follow the instructions that are listed in the rulebook for some of these games. You just come up with your own ways to play. Pathways is a great option for that, where you could easily, say, we're going to play a style where we put some discs already in there to create pathways, and now we have these new house rules that we're playing with. And I feel like that's going to appeal to younger audiences, but also to families who are just wanting some more flexibility out of this single thing that they're purchasing. Now they have multiple ways to play. There's tons of other variants in there, and like I said, with also crafting your own, you're going to find that there's lots of ways to play Pathways. But the just base experience of sliding these discs and having to create these lanes for yourself to make it easier, once you sort of grasp that concept, it is really fun to get into, and it's really interesting to see those really amazing shots happen where suddenly, someone from early on with no pathways on the board is able to get this perfect shot that gets perfectly into one of the holes of the backside, or someone is teetering on the edge of somewhere and you're able to sort of bank off of them to knock them off the board and get yourself into a spot. I can see this being a game that you want to set up like your little phone or a camera to basically capture some moments, because you'd have these great slow-mo moments of when you're playing. So that's honestly how you play Pathways. It's very simple. Let's jump into some of my experiences and thoughts of the actual game itself. So the first one I definitely want to talk about is who is Pathways for. I think that's the most important thing usually to discuss when we're talking about games that are being crowdfunded, because obviously there are a ton of games that get crowdfunded and you can't back everything. I mean, some people probably can, but I certainly can. I know most people have to be selective. So Pathways is definitely going to be for a specific audience. This is not a game that if you are constantly backing projects with lots of minis and deep strategy experiences and ones that you're going to like, schedule game nights around, that's not what Pathways is. This is a dexterity game, and it is one that is much more accessible and sort of, I don't want to say entry level because there is some strategy that you can get into to have deeper experiences, but it is one that you're going to probably introduce to people as a sort of a first dexterity experience, over like, deeper dexterity games like SEAL Team Flicks, for instance, is maybe not one you're going to introduce as a first dexterity game, whereas Pathways would be. At the same time, I think for families that have kids and are wanting sort of just something fun like this, and I don't want to use the word mindless, that's the wrong word, but something that you can, get to the table, have it out really quick, and you don't necessarily have to think about rules or anything, and really go over that process early on. You can just sort of say, put your discs down and you're flicking to the other side and you're seeing where you can, look how that one landed, that one's pretty good. You can see how, how you do, and we can kind of evolve from there. So I think that this accessibility, this is a really key aspect. I think that families are going to be drawn to this kind of dexterity experience for their kids to play. I don't necessarily think people that have large gaming groups that are constantly meeting to play, big experiences are going to get the same thing out of Pathways. But again, at the same time, I'm the type of person that when I build a collection, I like to have diversity in the collection, that no matter who comes over, who I'm introducing a game to, I have options. It's not that like my entire collection is campaign games or deep 3-hour experiences that I say, yes, I own all these games, I have nothing really to share with you. So for me, I don't honestly have any or very few dexterity games in my collection, especially accessible ones. So a game like Pathways is attractive to have that. So all of a sudden, if someone says, I would love to come over. Can I bring my kid with me? Or, someone comes over and they have no experience with games, and everything they remember from growing up is playing games like Rebound, if you remember, where flicking is the main thing. It's just sort of just this quick thing that just to sort of do something while you're, having a drink and talking about, your day and everything without having to be too focused. In that sense, having a game like Pathways on your shelf is super intriguing and interesting, because it's a game that you can easily pull out in those situations. So I think those are the type of people and gamers that are going to gravitate towards a game like Pathways. So if you're someone who's looking for a really deep experience that you're going to come back to over and over and over again and, really dive into more each time, that's not quite what Pathways is for, in my opinion. I think Pathways is for those more entry-level experiences, or for the ones where you're just like, I want to play a game right now and do something fun with, with my fingers and flicking around and stuff, but I don't necessarily want to be fully focused on it. I want to be able to watch TV while I'm doing it. I want to be able to have a conversation while I'm doing it, have some music on, and sort of just get into the whole thing and just have this experience where we're laughing about these amazing moments and amazing shots that we're doing. That's where I think Pathways is going to land with people especially well. So let's talk about some of the things that Pathways does well. Honestly, I think that the entire, Crokinole is obviously going to be the comparison that gets made right away. And Crokinole is a game that I would love to have a Crokinole board, like a really good one, and that is expensive to get or to have made or whatever the case may be. So the barrier to sort of get into playing Crokinole is way steeper than a game like Pathways. Pathways is going to be much more accessible, and yes, it might not be the exact same experience as Crokinole, and obviously Crokinole is a classic, but you're going to get that same sort of gameplay loop and feel and what's going on, that it might scratch that same itch for you. So what it does well is being able to fit into that mold, but in a much more accessible and even the ability to acquire it is going to be a much easier than a game like Crokinole for a lot of people. At the same time, the gameplay loop of creating pathways for yourself with the discs in here so that you can have it be easier to access the back row is really fun. I think the biggest barrier at the start is going to be learning, like with any game that involves flicking, you're going to have to learn the weight that you're putting on the disc to be able to reach the back row. But what I found is that early on playing Pathways, on my first couple turns, I was right away trying to get to the weight, realizing that it didn't matter because my disc was rarely going to breach the back row in those first few shots. There's too many holes along the way, it's going to bump into something and land. So what you want to do is create those pathways for yourself. When you have those paths that are now making it easier to access the back row, that's when you can start discovering the weight, and that's when that gameplay loop sort of lands. You say, where have my opponent's discs landed, that they're aiding me unintentionally with creating these pathways, that I can make it easier to quickly get to the back and maybe find a way to do it that they still have a hard time to reach my back row. And then also realizing if you're behind, what kind of risks you have to take to try to just catch up to what's going on. So that's what I think it does well, is that level of strategy is present while having this really slimmed down bare bones rule structure that doesn't, you can literally put this board down and you're playing within 30 seconds. Because even if you don't want to teach someone the rules, you can easily just say, let's not even think about the overall rules and strategy right now. All you need to know is put your disc behind this line, flick it, and try to get it to the back row. And if you wanted, that's all you would need to explain. And yes, there's strategy that you may not have touched on, but that's something you're going to discover as you play. Very quickly, you're going to realize this is hard, but all of a sudden when these discs are in these spots, suddenly it's a lot easier. That's going to click and you're going to realize, before I go to the back row, I'm going to try to get my discs into some of these locations, because now I can go across this entire pathway instead of it right away landing in this first spot. So that's sort of one of the really interesting things about pathways that it does well. The other thing it does well, this is a minor thing, but our copies came with this little tool that is this sort of piece of wood with this little suction cup. And I gotta tell you, for some reason, it is so satisfying to use this to pick up these pieces and get them out of these spots. Oh, normally, otherwise you're lifting up the entire board, which disrupts play, or you're trying to pick it up with your fingers. This tool is one of the most satisfying afterthoughts of a game that I've had in a while. And I can't explain it, you'd have to experience it yourself. But going around and just grabbing these things out, if someone can make a game in and of itself with using this suction tool on your turn every single time, you've pretty much sold me apparently, because I am addicted to using this thing. So kudos to the simple design of this. And maybe you let me know once you've played Pathways if you choose to back it, if it's just me and I'm the outlier here, or if you're having as much fun with this thing as I am. Let's talk about some of the things I think you should be aware of if you're thinking about backing this. Like I said, this is sort of an entry-level dexterity experience that can be played deeper as you sort of get into the pathways themselves. And if you're playing with other people that have that strategy mentality and want to get better, suddenly you could have these these pro moves and everything happening. But at the same time, I feel like there is a ceiling to Pathways. This isn't necessarily a game I think that you're gonna constantly pull out and have multi-hour sessions of Pathways like you might with some of the other board games in the space that are in and of themselves 2-hour experiences that you're going to want to play regularly. I think Pathways is something that you're going to pull out and say, hey, while we're having our coffee in the morning before the two of us go to work or whatever the case may be, let's play a quick game of Pathways. Even if we don't play up to the score of 11 or whatever it may be, let's just play however many games we can get in and just see what kind of fun we can have. Or maybe we'll play a single game, it takes 5 minutes and that's all there is to it, kind of thing. So in that sense it works. It's not going to be this experience that if you only have a couple games in your collection, that perhaps is the one that just solidifies your collection and you're just like, this is all we play now. I think that if that's sort of what you're gravitating towards, it's going to wear thin over time. This isn't the main course of your gaming collection. This is good to have that you're going to find time to play, especially with younger audience, especially with people that aren't playing board games as much or don't want to do an experience that has a lot of rules. That's going to work for Pathways. It's not going to sort of fill the void of some of the other games in the space that are way more complex. So in that sense, if that's what you're looking for, this might not be the game for you. Keep that in mind when you're making your decision. Likewise, you should be aware that there is going to be a bit of a luck factor early on in your Pathways experience. And I say early on because with any dexterity game, as you get better, even when I've seen professional crokinole players, there's aspects of crokinole that I would think, oh, like a lot of this is luck based, and suddenly you realize people just get very, very precise and good. So I feel like over time the luck's going to diminish and be mitigated, but early on you're going to have moments where you have this entire pathway lined up and you think, I have a clear path to go right to this spot. This should be no problem. And you're going to take a shot and you're either going to, slide over everything, go right past it, or it's going to catch the edge of something and bounce into a spot and you're going to think, why did I create this pathway? It ended up not even functioning for me. Likewise, you're going to have your opponent where they have a path with no discs in it whatsoever, and you're going to think, oh, I'm totally safe. And they're going to flick it, and somehow it's going to make it right there. And you're going to, well, what the heck? You didn't even build a pathway, and you're getting these shots. So there is a bit of a luck element, I would say, to it, that people are just going to get lucky with some of their shots. That does make it accessible to younger audiences that they never feel completely out of it. It is going to frustrate some people that are looking for super deep strategy, perhaps, that are thinking, what am I building towards if I can just have this luck happen? It's no different than when you're playing games that have dice elements in them, or bag building and what you're pulling out of them. So it's not a detraction from the game, but something to be aware of if you're someone who just does not like luck in your games and you want it to be fully strategy based. That's not what you're going to get here. Not a problem for me. Something you should just be aware of before you back. All right, so final thoughts on Pathways. I think this is a really cool experience. I think that if you were looking for a dexterity game in your collection, that's not something you have. If it's a gap, this is gonna be one that's way more accessible than potentially getting a crokinole board. And also, really easy from a rules perspective than some of the other dexterity games that are out there. There's a lot of cool dexterity games out there, but I think that in many ways, like the roll and write genre, that is a very simple genre, but people are finding ways to really make it a complex genre, which is good for some and not so good for the others. I think that Pathways is more on that side where this is accessible. This is your first dexterity experience potentially. This is the one that kids can easily play. I know that when I was growing up and playing games like this, or even some board games that didn't have a lot of rules overhead, I would often, if I was an only child, I didn't have siblings, if I didn't have friends over and I wanted to play these games, sometimes I play both roles and I would say, I'm gonna pretend that this person is this score and mine is this score, and I'm just gonna be able to get this to the table and just also, keep track of it, and it was satisfying for me. Pathways is one of those games you could do that. You could easily find this experience to play by yourself where you're handling both shots and you're, finding a way to create an experience that's fully your own, making your own rules for it. So in that sense, it's very accessible. It's very, like I said, you can honestly teach this game in 30 seconds or less if you don't want to get into the strategy and let people discover the strategy themselves. So that would be my main recommendation, is if you're someone that is lacking this type of experience in your collection, an entry-level experience, a dexterity experience, Pathways is a great one to look into and a great one to kind of start with. If you have kids, if you have younger people that you're constantly, cousins or nieces or nephews that are coming over that you want to have a game like this to be able to play with them, awesome choice as well. I think the only consideration you need to make is if you are someone who gravitates to more strategic, large-scale experiences, but you've always been curious about dexterity games, just keep in mind that this is going to feel entry-level. It's going to feel quick. It's going to feel, at certain times, mindless, like you can do other things while you're playing. That's okay, and I think that I love having a game like that in my collection. It may not be for you, consider that when you're backing, but otherwise I think that if anything else, you're gonna love using this tool to pull out these discs. I sure do, and there's been times I've set it up thinking like, maybe I can just like pull out some discs for a while. I love this tool. I don't know what it is. Anyways, Pathways is a really cool experience. I think you should check it out, especially if any of the things I said resonate with you. Let me know in the comments what you think, and if you have any questions whatsoever about Pathways, I'm happy to answer them. I hope that if you're interested in this, that it lands for you and you have a good experience and you're able to sort of find the audience that it lands with, because I think I will now that I've been able to experience it in my collection, and I'm excited to see the final product. I should have mentioned, obviously all of this is prototype components. The components we have are actually really, really good. They could be final components. I wouldn't be surprised at all, but they are prototype. Things can change in the process, whether to do with the product or the components or gameplay modes, things like that. So just keep that in mind. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it helps you out in making your decision, and we'll see you in the next one.